What happens when a dream trip turns into a nightmare you can never wake from? Imagine stepping into a land that calls itself a nation, but operates more like a fortress, where every glance is observed, every word dissected, and where even the smallest act can be twisted into a crime against the state. North Korea doesn't see tourists, it sees potential enemies. And in this world, punishment is not just a consequence, it is a weapon. For many, travel represents freedom. The ability to cross borders, meet strangers, and collect stories. But in Pyongyang, freedom is an illusion carefully staged for foreign eyes. Behind the bright murals and choreographed parades lies a system that thrives on fear, secrecy, and control. Here, a poster on a hotel wall is not decoration, it is sacred propaganda. And touching it, even by mistake, can transform you from a traveler into a target. This is the story of Otto Warmbier, a young American who walked into North Korea seeking adventure and left, carrying the weight of an entire regime's paranoia. His case isn't just about one man's tragedy. It is about a nation that turns individuals into bargaining chips, where confessions are scripted and punishment is designed not for justice, but for spectacle. As we peel back the layers of this story, I want you to think carefully. What does it mean when a government uses punishment not as correction, but as theater, as leverage, as a way to remind the world that it holds human lives in its grip? Because Otto's journey forces us to face an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the harshest prisons are not built of concrete and steel, but of silence and power. And it's there, in that silence, that our story begins to unfold. And as we begin to peel away the layers of Otto's story, it's impossible not to pause for a moment and reflect on what this means for us too. These aren't just distant headlines. They are reminders of how fragile freedom can be, and how quickly it can be stripped away under systems built on fear. Sometimes a single story like this leaves us with questions that linger far beyond the screen. Questions about power, about justice, and about the cost of silence. That's why your voice here matters. If something in what you've heard so far resonates with you, maybe a detail that shocked you, or a thought that made you reflect, share it in the comments. Your perspective adds to the conversation, and believe me, it helps shape the way these stories are told. When you leave a comment, it's not just words, it's a reminder that you're part of a community that values truth, dialogue, and awareness. And if you feel that stories like this need to continue being uncovered and shared, a simple like on this video goes further than you might think. It signals to the platform that this content has meaning, that it deserves to reach more people who might never otherwise confront these realities. Subscribing is another way of saying, I want to keep walking through these stories with you, to keep opening doors that many would rather stay shut. Because the truth is, none of us should navigate these questions alone. Each reaction, each interaction, keeps this channel alive, not as a monologue, but as an exchange. And as we move forward, I want to keep that exchange alive with you, uncovering layer after layer of what punishment truly means inside the walls of regimes like this one. Behind every postcard image of paradise, there is often a shadow no one wants to see. If Bali glows with sun-kissed beaches and endless waves, North Korea builds its walls with silence, fear, and control. And inside those walls, survival itself becomes a currency. For years, the regime has thrived on corruption, bribes in exchange for food, favors for safety, power traded like contraband in a marketplace where humanity is rationed. What outsiders call governance, many inside know only as survival through shadows. The pandemic turned that fragile balance into catastrophe. When the borders closed, it was not just trade that stopped, it was hope. Famine crept in, not announced by headlines but whispered in the emptiness of markets, in the quiet of families watching neighbors starve. Unlike Bali, Where tourists flood in and out with ease, Pyongyang's gates became impenetrable, trapping millions in what can only be described as a living quarantine of hunger. Think of it. One island feeds off waves of foreign money, while the other suffocates under the weight of sealed borders and silent mouths. Two different worlds, yet drawn on the same map. This is more than politics. It is punishment extended across a nation, not as a sentence for crime, but as a system of existence. The irony is brutal. In a place where even food is weaponized, survival depends not on strength, but on bending to the rules of a corrupt machinery. And that raises the unsettling thought: if a paradise can mask a prison, what does it really mean to live free? Now, I want to take you even deeper, into the stories that expose how punishment in North Korea goes far beyond prisons and trials, shaping every breath, every step, every choice of its people. In North Korea, time itself can feel like a sentence. For the so-called Jangmadang generation, the young men and women born during famine and raised in underground markets rather than state rations, survival is a daily act of quiet rebellion. They know the regime's promises are hollow, yet the walls around them keep tightening. Every law is written not to protect, but to punish. A simple haircut, a foreign song on a phone, even genes can become grounds for condemnation. In this landscape, punishment is not just a consequence of crime. It is a tool of control, a shadow hanging over every step. Public executions are staged like grotesque theater, with crowds forced to watch a life extinguished as if it were a warning carved into the air itself. These moments are meant to silence questions before they are spoken, to plant fear deep, enough that it takes root in the next generation. Propaganda floods every classroom, every screen, every corner of daily life, hammering the message that obedience is survival. And yet beneath the surface, cracks form, in whispered conversations, in the smuggled flash drives showing another world, in the silent dreams of escape. The tragedy lies in the suspension between knowing and acting, between awareness and paralysis. It is like standing on a frozen river, hearing the ice crack beneath your feet, but with nowhere else to go. This is what makes the Jangmadang youth both dangerous to the regime and fragile in their own lives. They see the truth, but the cost of acknowledging it out loud is unbearable. If you had grown up in a world where even your thoughts could be criminalized, what would freedom mean to you? Otto Warmbier was not a soldier, not a spy, not even a man of influence. He was a student, 21 years old, who boarded a flight to Pyongyang looking for a story to tell when he came home. But in a country where punishment is both law and theater, his story was never his to write. According to the North Korean regime, his crime was simple: attempting to remove a propaganda poster from a hotel wall. To the outside world, this seemed like a reckless act of curiosity. To the regime, it was an opportunity. In a place where power is sustained through fear and spectacle, Otto became more than a tourist. He became a symbol. Overnight, a college student was recast as a CIA agent, his actions framed as sabotage against the state. His trial was not about truth, but about narrative. North Korea needed an enemy, and Otto's face fit the role. He was paraded before cameras, made to confess in a trembling voice, and used as proof that even the most innocent could be transformed into a villain if the script demanded it. The image of him standing before the microphones, breaking down in tears, was not just heartbreaking, it was calculated. A performance, staged for the international audience, designed to remind the world that the regime could take anyone and bend them into a pawn. Otto became a marionette, his strings pulled by those who knew that his suffering carried diplomatic weight. Now I want to go deeper into what this really means, how a single arrest became a bargaining chip between nations, and how a young man's life was consumed in the machinery of propaganda. But before that, let me leave you with a question. If your freedom could be stolen and rewritten into someone else's story, what part of you would they erase first? In North Korea, justice is not measured by evidence, but by obedience to the narrative the regime needs to tell. Once someone falls into the machinery of the state, innocence becomes irrelevant. What matters is the script, and the script demands a confession. Otto Warmbier's case revealed this with painful clarity. Former insiders describe interrogation rooms where silence is broken not by truth, but by the sound of fists striking flesh, by electric shocks running through restrained bodies, by the suffocating terror of water torture, or the searing burn of chili-laced liquid forced into the nose. These are not instruments of investigation. They are instruments of theater. The purpose is not to discover what happened, but to create a story the regime can sell to its people and to the world. A student tearing a poster cannot destabilize a government, but a student branded as a foreign spy, controlled by the CIA, becomes a powerful prop in the spectacle of punishment. The confession is the climax of this play, coerced under the weight of fear until the victim utters words that no longer belong to them. Even when false, those words are enough to stamp a narrative with the illusion of legitimacy. The former spy makes it clear: if the state declares you guilty, guilt is no longer a question. It is a destiny written in advance. And so, confessions flow not from free will, but from desperation to end the pain, to survive another hour. The body breaks before the spirit does, but eventually both are captured, leaving behind only a shadow that echoes what the interrogators want to hear. Now think about it. If truth itself can be beaten out of shape, what chance does justice ever have inside such a system? The image of Otto Warmbier, trembling and weeping before the cameras, is one of the most haunting symbols of state-controlled theater in modern history. His words were not his own, his gestures not born from sincerity, but from coercion. Every tear that rolled down his face was framed by the regime as evidence of guilt. Yet to the outside world, it looked like something far darker. A human soul stripped of dignity, forced to confess under the crushing weight of fear. North Korea turned a young student into a living warning, a spectacle designed to echo across borders. This is what happens when you cross us. Those dim corridors where Otto was held are not unique to his story. Former prisoners describe them as places where silence itself becomes suffocating. The sound of boots in the hallway, the jangle of keys, or the sudden opening of a heavy metal door could mean another round of interrogation, another demand for obedience. These spaces are designed to break the human psyche, to remind captives that the outside world is unreachable, and that only submission will keep them alive another day. And Otto was not the only one caught in this theater of punishment. Journalists, missionaries, and even casual travelers have been cast into the same play, their lives turned into bargaining chips on the negotiating table of international politics. Each one is a pawn in a game where truth has no weight, only leverage. The regime uses them the way a chess master sacrifices pieces, not because of who they are, but because of the message their suffering sends. Now, I want to lean even deeper into this question. If a government can weaponize silence, fear, and even tears, transforming ordinary people into instruments of its narrative, what does that tell us about the true nature of power? When Otto Warmbier was finally returned to the United States, the world expected to see a young man battered by months of harsh imprisonment. What arrived, however, was something far more chilling. Otto was in a coma, his body intact on the outside, but his mind irreparably broken. No obvious scars, no shattered bones, no physical evidence of torture in the way we typically imagine it. Instead, he was trapped in a prison no one could see, his own body, silent and unresponsive, carrying secrets that would never be spoken. For many, this was the cruelest twist of all. If his injuries had been visible, there might have been answers, explanations, a clearer narrative of what had been done to him. But the absence of visible wounds opened the door to a darker speculation, that what destroyed Otto was not just brutality, but science. The former spy suggests a possibility that feels like something out of a dystopian novel. The use of drugs, chemicals, or experimental methods not designed to kill, but to erase. The idea that a regime could weaponize silence itself, not only through fear and confinement, but through the manipulation of biology, transforms his case into something more than an individual tragedy. It becomes a message. Memory can be smothered, identity dissolved, resistance chemically muted. This theory connects uncomfortably with whispers of biological weapons programs and chemical experiments long rumored in North Korea. If true, Otto's story was not only about punishment, but about control at its most invasive level. Control of consciousness itself. His return was not a gesture of mercy, but a final act of theater, presenting a broken man as proof of power, while leaving the world with questions that could never be answered. And here, another question emerges, perhaps the most unsettling of all. What does it mean when the body itself becomes the regime's final prison, locking away not only freedom, but the very possibility of truth? Inside the sealed borders of North Korea, punishment takes on forms that often defy imagination. Beyond the iron gates and dark interrogation rooms lies another possibility, one that sends shivers through anyone who dares to consider it. The hidden laboratories where biology and chemistry become tools of political control. Testimonies from defectors and intelligence. Reports point to research facilities where experiments are not about healing, but about silencing. In this context, Otto Warmbier's fate begins to look less like the result of crude brutality and more like the product of an invisible weapon. Something designed to leave no scars, no evidence, only silence. Biological and chemical warfare has long been whispered about in connection with Pyongyang. For decades, rumors circulated of agents capable of causing paralysis, amnesia, or death without trace. The suggestion is not science fiction. History has shown how authoritarian regimes have weaponized laboratories as efficiently as they have weaponized fear. The idea that Otto could have been subjected to substances engineered to erase memory or suppress resistance casts his tragedy into a different light. It becomes not just a personal punishment, but a chilling demonstration. Proof that in this system, even the body can be rewritten, the truth erased at the cellular level. This possibility exposes a deeper cruelty. Punishment no longer needs chains or visible wounds. It can be delivered invisibly, in doses and vapors, in ways that make denial as easy as silence. If such methods were used, Otto's return in a coma was not simply a consequence of mistreatment, but the unveiling of a more insidious power. A reminder to the world that North Korea's tools of control are evolving. And it leaves us with an unsettling question. When a dictatorship masters the art of making punishment invisible, how do we even begin to hold it accountable? If you followed the story so far, write the word invisible in the comments. A small act of resistance against forgetting. Every dictatorship hides its sharpest weapons not in open battlefields, but in shadows where silence is deadlier than bullets. In Otto's case, the silence came wrapped in medical mystery. He returned to his country unrecognizable, no broken bones, no scars that could tell a story. Yet his mind and body were extinguished as if someone had pressed erase on a human life. The official line dismissed it as illness, but the whispers of those who knew the system spoke of something else. Chemicals, substances, tools designed not to kill instantly, but to extinguish memory and will. This is where punishment transforms into a science of invisibility. The testimony of defectors points to research centers, where biological and chemical experiments are not just theories, but quiet realities. Here, the human body becomes a laboratory, a vessel to test control. It's a chilling reminder that in a regime obsessed with survival, people are treated as raw material for experiments meant to terrify without leaving evidence. If bruises fade, if bones heal, toxins and engineered substances linger unseen, erasing voices before they can testify. It is almost poetic in its cruelty. A prison without walls where the mind itself is shackled. Otto's silence was not an accident. It was the perfect outcome for those who feared what his words could reveal. And this forces us to ask, when a regime wields science as a weapon of fear, are its victims ever truly buried, or do they become echoes haunting the conscience of the world? In North Korea, punishment is not just a sentence. It is a stage play of power, a weapon wielded to silence, to control, to erase. Otto Warmbier's fate became the ultimate reminder of how fragile freedom can be when it collides with a regime that turns even the smallest act into a threat. A missing poster on a hotel wall was never about paper or ink. It was about sending a message to the world that one life could be sacrificed to preserve the illusion of strength. His silence, imposed by drugs, torture, or something darker, speaks louder than any speech he could have given. And it lingers, because behind Otto's story, there are countless names we will never know, faces that will never return. That is the true echo of punishment. It doesn't end with the victim, it reverberates in everyone who dares to watch. If you've stayed with me until this moment, it means this story mattered to you. So let me ask you something deeper. If your voice was suddenly taken away, like Otto's was, what would you want the world to remember about you? Write it in the comments. I'll be reading every single one. And if you felt this journey was worth it, leave a like. It helps keep these stories alive and brings more people into this reflection. Subscribe if you want to walk further with me into places where silence hides truths we cannot afford to ignore. There's another video right here that connects directly with what we just explored. Click it and let's continue together over there.